friends. Welcome to Embracing Your Season. I'm your host, Paige Clingenpeel. Thank you so much for joining me today. We have a spectacular episode today, but before I introduce you to him, I want to tell you a little bit about Homeward. Homeward is a not-for-profit ministry reaching around the world to help families succeed. We would love to invite you to consider being a partner in this exciting and life-changing outreach. Your prayer and financial support goes directly to make a difference to the lives of families. Your gift of any amount will allow Homeward to continue to provide free podcasts, blogs, and the Homeward YouTube channel, and so many more opportunities for family ministry outreaches. We believe you can reach out to the parents and marriages and bring hope and healing that will change the trajectory of families for eternity. Now, that is a cool thing. Your prayers and financial support is so important. So, if you feel led, you can go to homeward.com and click the donate now button. And so joining me now is my amazing producer, Mike Segovia.
Hi, Paige. How you doing?
I'm doing well today. How are you, Mike?
I'm doing good, but I'm not gonna lie to you. I'm cold. It's like
Oh,
11 degrees outside here in Colorado, and the wind is
it's the
blowing.
season.
And and
It's
and
yeah.
and, and somehow, some way, Paige, this morning I need to navigate my way out to the car and then to the gym. And so I don't know how that's gonna happen,
Ooh.
but yeah.
I'm not sure
Um,
that's worth it. I mean, you balance like bodily health and, the physical cold. I'm not sure
uh,
what will win.
well, it is January, and I need to drop 10 pounds, so I'm gonna do it. I'm
Oh,
gonna throw my
okay.
jacket on, and I'm gonna go do it.
Good
But
for you.
yes, absolutely. But I know you are totally excited about our guest today. It's Dr. Curt Thompson. Paige, I know you're excited.
I'm so excited to have Dr. Thompson on this show. So, as a clinician, I have used tons of his resources and his books. He has an amazing podcast that people can listen to as well, which he'll reference, but you can also find in the show notes. But the reason why today's conversation is so impactful for me is because we're going to talk about grief. Which, Mike, like, how many times do we just go into the conversation with, like, hey, I'm excited to talk about grief?
Yeah.
But the reason why this hits me close to home is because within the last 3 to 4 years, I've had 3 dear friends who have lost their teenage sons
Mm,
to cancer, car accident, illness, and each one has, kinda handled it differently, and I believe it all stems from their community and their faith relationship, and I've been honored to walk alongside them, but it's like they're even as a clinician, even as a friend, I'm always like, I want to walk with you well, and I don't
yeah.
always know what to do. And so I know Dr. Thompson speaks about this in his new book, The Deepest Place. And I know I just can't get enough of the wisdom that he offers. So yeah, I'm super pumped to have him on the show today.
Yeah, it's gonna be great. And we're gonna get to that conversation in just a minute here. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about our guest today, Dr. Curt Thompson. He's a board certified psychiatrist, author, speaker, and co-host of the Being Known podcast. So you guys got to check that out. He has been in private practice for over 30 years in Falls Church, Virginia. He's graduated from Wright State University's Boone Schaft School of Medicine and completed his psychiatric residency at Temple University Hospital. With conviction and humor, he trains clinicians and speaks at workshops, retreats, and conferences integrating neuroscience, human relationships, and Christian faith. Before we get to the show, I want to remind you to stick around at the end for Paige's 3 takeaways. But let's get to our conversation now with Dr. Curt Thompson and Paige on this edition of Embracing Your Season.
Well, Dr. Thompson, I am so grateful that you have chosen to join us today and share your wisdom with us.
Mm,
So thanks for
mm.
being here.
Paige, first of all, in just being, thank you for inviting me. It's humbling to be part of this. It's an honor to have been invited to be part of this. We all know that if we're following Jesus, that life is better, but it doesn't mean it's easier. And I'm always grateful to be in the room with somebody else who knows what it's like to follow the King, and that following the King is the most beautiful thing that we'll do, and it's probably the hardest thing that we'll do. And then we like to say, look, the brain can do a lot of hard things for a really long as it doesn't have to do it by itself. So I'm really grateful to be here with you today. So thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, thank you. I would love for people to know a little bit more about you and what you do
Hmm,
in your
hmm,
organization, your ministries.
hmm. Well, I think, the first thing that probably most important to say is that I've been married for uh, more than 38 years to Phyllis, who is been, one of, if not the most important. Uh, I don't even want to just say people in my life. I want to say ways that God is using to form me and shape me and turn me into a person that I hope that I want to become. And we have two adult kids, Rachel and Nathan, who also give me the privilege of being a father to two people who are also themselves working really, really hard to follow Jesus. And you can't really, like, you just say, goodness, that's enough.
Yeah.
That's enough. I don't deserve my life, and those are the three biggest reasons why that's true. Um, what I do for a living is I'm a psychiatrist in private practice, as Mike mentioned, and we like to say in our work that our work is really about helping people tell their stories more truly. And by truly, we don't just mean true like according to the facts as they really are. We mean tell their stories faithfully in light of the story of the biblical narrative that reminds us that we are people who were made to be God's image bearers, made in joy and delight, made to co-create beauty and goodness with him in the world, and that hasn't changed from the very beginning. We obviously don't do that job very well, and we didn't just need instruction as to how to do it. We needed a rescuer who can not just show us how to do it, but who can enable us to do it. And we who follow Jesus believe that he, as the king, is how God is doing this with us. But God's mission from the first two pages of the Bible hasn't changed. And even in Jesus, he is helping us practice for this new heaven and earth that are coming. And in treating patients, which we do, we take care. I have a private practice that I've been part of for over 30 years. I also have a small nonprofit, the Center for Being Known, that really it exists to help this process of telling their story. People tell their stories more truly in a more expansive way. Then we have the podcast that we are part of, myself and Pepper Sweeney and Amy Chella, that are trying to extend these offerings into the general public, and hopefully people who listen to that find it to be helpful. And it's just, again, I'm just really grateful to be able to do the things that God has put before me to do, and working hard to steward those as best we can.
So good. And I mean, dropping the gospel message in the beginning, I love
Mm,
that. What
mm,
a great reminder to center us into what our purpose is.
mm,
And I love the fact you talk about being known
mm,
because that is one of those core intrinsic needs that often we're looking to the world
mhm,
around us to tell
mhm.
us when in reality we need to look at our creator.
Mm,
And so
mm,
thanks for even just starting with that.
mm,
What a great
mm, mm,
foundation.
mm, mm,
So we're transitioning to talk about something maybe not as much fun for people to
mm,
listen to or to even be in a season of,
mm,
but it's grief.
mhm,
And so I'm going to quote you because I love the way that you define even grief. And it says, grief is our emotional or yeah, is our emotional inflammatory response to loss. It is
mhm,
an interpersonal neurobiological event for which we react when we are deprived of something, anything, to which we have significant emotional attachment,
mhm,
to which we ascribe salient meaning.
mhm.
Can you dig into that a little bit more?
I admit it's a bit of a long-winded sentence. Um,
But it's so good.
yeah.
It's so deep.
Well, I think we in a previous work, in the Soul of Desire, we talk about this notion that we are people of great longing. This is how we've been made as being image bearers of the Creator. He made us out of longing to share the world with us. As his image bearers, we are also people of great and infinite longing. Um, and of course, there are lots of things that we long for. We can look around and say, "Well, I long for good food. I long for the Ohio State Buckeyes to win the national championship." We
Ooh, not sure I'll
okay,
agree with that.
okay,
I'm Notre Dame
okay,
fan,
okay,
okay?
okay. All right, all right. we can talk about that. Right. I long for my marriage to be rich and full. I long for my children to grow into adults who are also discovering and working through great meaning in their life. I long for my kids to have relationships with the King. All these kinds of things. We long for our communities to live joyfully and peaceably, and all those things. But the thread that runs through all of that is what happens the moment we come into the world. We say, like, every baby comes into the world looking for someone, looking for her, looking for someone, looking for him. This longing to be seen, this longing to be deeply known, because it is in that process of being known through secure attachment that I'm actually able to then go on and be commissioned to create beauty and goodness in the world, in the face of a world that is imperfect, in the face of a world that is often hard, even violent. And that violence begins on the third page of the Bible, and it runs through our veins. Uh, I am not regularly committing acts of violence that put me in jail. I even grew up in an evangelical Quaker community where we are committed to being peacemakers in the world. And at the same time, I will tell you, Paige, like, I am a man who has the potential for violence, and it doesn't have to be a felonious assault. It could be just with my thinking, with my words, with my irritation, with my, you know, tendency in moments of being contemptuous of someone in the world. And because of this violence, the blood on the ground that God says to Cain, your brother's blood calls out to me, we are people of great grief. We're people of great longing, and we are people of great grief. And our grief, whether it's in large portions because we've lost a child, because of the violence that we've experienced, because of all kinds of things, whether it's the violence that happens in the kitchen with words across the table, there is a sense of connection that I deeply long for. This sense of being known, this sense of the baby coming into the world looking to be found. Like, I'm looking for that every day, all day. And I look at that for my patients, because my patients are looking for that with me. I'm looking for that with my wife, with my friends. This is what we're looking for. And all violence creates this disconnection, this loss. And all the things that I lose, whether it's my best fountain pen, or it's a relationship, or it's the ding in my new car, all those things are representations of relational connection. The fountain pen, I'm a fountain pen junkie, and why does it matter to me if my fountain pen, if I lose my favorite fountain pen, like, which I have done? It's because the pen represents what I write, and what I write connects me to myself, and that connects me to other people. Ultimately, this is about all of our grief is Jesus weeping over Jerusalem. It is him saying, "How long and how much have I wanted to draw you to myself, but you would not come." This loss of connection. And so, so much of what happens in our world, we are a group of humans that have a collection of unrepaired ruptures that begin in childhood. They happen in our families, and they happen in our schools and our playgrounds and workplaces and churches, not the least. And when that collection of unrepaired ruptures gets to be too much, my body will start to develop symptoms, and I get panic disorder, and I have depression, and I have too much drinking, and I have pornography addiction, and I have violence in my house. All these things that we do. My obsessive compulsive disorder is largely, often, a function of grief that is unrecognized, unidentified, and we carry this with us. Just like we carry all kinds of small physical insults, like, we get infections, we carry viruses with us, we do. And my body is working really hard. Your white blood cell system is doing everything it can to protect you from things that you don't even know, that you don't know about, that are going on. Happens with all of us. We do this with our grief. We walk around containing all kinds of griefs from unrepaired ruptures. And some of these ruptures are ones that just seem impossible. We mentioned earlier what it means to lose a child. I mean, as Peter Jackson put into the words of King Theoden in The Lord of the Rings, no parent should ever have to bury their child. You can't put, you can't explain that. You can't put words to that. That's a loss for which all we have is grief. And we also have the words of Jesus in John 16:33, where he said, I have said these words to you so that in me you will have peace. Not peace as the world gives. For in the world you will have tribulation. In the world you will have grief. This is the world that we live in. Grief is something we experience because we have lost the beauty of this world in relationships, in physicality, in our own medical losses, in our own relational losses. That's the world that we live in. And then he says the strangest thing. I'm reading the text and you're thinking, like, the world, you're in this world, you're going to have tribulation. And you'd think he'd say, so you need to study, you need to buck up, you need to make sure that, you're ready for this. Or he might say, but it'll be okay. No, he says, but be of good cheer.
Mm, right.
I don't know, like,
Oh, goodness.
how am I supposed to be of good cheer in the face of this grief, which is so real, so palpable, so visceral, and what feels like never ending? And then he says, for in me, in me, in me, you will have peace, for I have overcome the world. And this really points us to this notion that the relationship that we have with Jesus through the presence and power of the Holy Spirit and through his body is the game changer for how we form hope in the very presence of our grief, not because we eliminate our grief, we pretend it doesn't exist, we deny it. No, we're not doing that. The cross is no denial of grief. The cross is a full throated reception of grief. Because Easter's coming, something none of us would have predicted. And we are an Easter people, and we want to live an Easter life that is our practicing for the heaven that's coming in its fullness. And that is the work that we do. It's getting us ready for the world that's coming.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So good. And that's where I don't think people have a firm understanding of the potential of grief being a catalyst to hope.
Yeah.
And you speak a little bit about the durable hope.
Mhm.
Can you explain that a bit more as well?
There is some, oddly enough, at some point, if you're doing any kind of research, you end up talking about rat experiments. And there's the study that was done with two cohorts of rats, and one cohort of rats were given everything that cohort of rats would want that would be nourishing for their life. So interesting mazes to run in, plenty of food supply, plenty of rest, all the thing. It's like rat Disney World. I mean, whatever that they would need, this is what they get. The second cohort of rats were given the same thing, but every now and again, that process was interrupted. And they would then be exposed to some significant stressor that would take them to the brink of being overwhelmed, but not quite. So they would be malnourished. There would be some kind of pain stimulus. There would be some temperature adjustment. There would be, a flat box where there's nothing interesting to do. But every time they would be brought back to a place of nourishment. And then both of these cohorts of rats were exposed to an overwhelming stressor. And the real question was, which cohort of rat survives and then flourishes in the face of an overwhelming stressor? Now, what's really interesting is not so much the common sense question of like, well, which group does? And most people, when you ask them, they'll say, oh yeah, we think the group that has been exposed to stress and has come back from that, they're a stronger group, a stronger breed. And the answer is yes, they do survive more effectively. What's even more interesting is that when you look at the brains of those rats compared to the brains of the rats who did not have that kind of stress, is that everything about their neural connections, everything about their neurons in their brains were more thickly connected. There were more neurons present in the brain. The neuron connections were larger. The trunks of the neurons were larger. Everything about the brain activity in these rats was larger. Now, we can't make a one-to-one uh, comparison with humans because we're not doing these kinds of experiments with humans and looking at their brain structures. But this we do know, that when human beings undergo ruptures, relational ruptures, even significant ones, and those ruptures are effectively repaired, we know that the quality and durability of those relationships tend over time to be stronger than they were even before the rupture was experienced.
Interesting.
And so when we look at human beings, when we say that we've had this kind of grief, and most of our life has been spent burying our grief, coping with our grief, compartmentalizing it, containing it, not really exposing it or revealing it to anyone. I am alone with my grief. I'm alone with my inflamed neural networks. By the way, this is what happens. Stress hormones enter into the brain. They remain at low levels, which becomes poisonous to the brain. This is not a good thing for us. But when I connect with a person, when a person hears my grief, when a person comes to be fully present with me, and we would say, this is what Good Friday is. Good Friday, and even when we read in First Peter that, or Second Peter, how Jesus preached to the dead. Holy Saturday is holy for a reason. That something's happening in this world that we can't see or can't know. That there's no one who has not heard the voice of the King calling. That when that kind of meeting of Jesus with our grief happens, the potential for even renewed and strengthened neural networks, strengthened relationship, my capacity to become more than who I was after my grief experience is something that it's beyond us to imagine. But this is how it is that our God could imagine Good Friday because he could also imagine Easter, something that nobody else saw coming. And so when we are willing to allow ourselves to be known in the very presence of our grief, it literally allows new neural networks within my brain to begin to form and grow and expand because my grief is being held and carried by someone else. I'm being seen, I'm being soothed. There's a thickening of a sense of compassion, and there is a part of me that now, because you are sharing it and I'm not carrying it by myself, I am no longer burning the energy that I used to burn just to have to contain it. If I have to pick up a 5-gallon bucket of water, not a problem. If I have to carry it for 3 miles, that's a different question altogether. But if somebody comes along and says, I'll carry this with you, that's a different kind of journey. This is what happens in our brains. This is what happens when the body of Jesus comes for those who need that particular kind of healing of grief. When we look at the woman who had the bleeding problem in all the Gospels, in Mark chapter 5 in particular, where she comes and she has a plan for her healing. And her plan is to very quietly and unassumedly tug on his robe, and then it'll be done. And she'll have all she needs because this is all she understands herself to be. This is what her grief does. Her grief does not just wound her, it confines and shrinks her capacity to understand who she is. For her, I'm a woman with a bleeding problem. And for her, all she needs is to just pull on his robe, and that would have been enough. She thinks, so she thinks, until what happens? He says, "Stop. Who touched me?" And you can imagine, she's like, crap. What's because there are parts of her grief that have not yet been named. She's only known as the woman with a bleeding problem, but that's not all she is. She's the woman who has no husband because of it. She's a woman who has no children. She's a woman who has no community. She's a woman who has no work. She's a woman who has no place in the world. And what does Jesus do? He doesn't say, well, whoever touched me, meet me at 3 o'clock later this afternoon at such and such a place and we'll have a private conversation. No, in front of everybody. And the text in Mark says, I mean, at some point, he's like, he's waiting, like he's not moving until whoever it is comes forward. And she comes forward with fear and trembling. She falls at his feet. The text reads, with fear and trembling. And then the text reads this, and she told him everything about herself. And this is an example of how when you give Jesus an inch, he's going to take the whole mile. Because he does not want any part of our grief to be left unseen, unhealed. And this is true for her. She had an idea, this is what my healing is going to look like. And he's thinking, oh, no, sister, there is so much more that we're going to do here. It's going to require your cooperation. It's going to require courage. It's going to require you to push through your fear and trembling. It's going to require you to push through your shame of being exposed in front of all these people. But this very act means that she does not just have her bleeding healed, but she has healed the things that were so much bigger than that. That she can't know until somebody else invites her into the space where she can be known, not just by Jesus, but by those who are bearing witness to her, who probably then draw her into their community, such that she becomes someone that now is read about throughout the last 2 millennia. And who knows how many people have come to Jesus because of her willingness to allow her grief to be fully seen and known.
Mm, so good. So powerful. I love the emphasis on we think we understand what healing should look like, but God has such a bigger picture. But speaking to the people that maybe well, this is a good example. So I'm reading the Bible chronologically. And so it's like just staying in the Old Testament right now, which means I'm reading Job for like what feels like 5 weeks in a row, which is for those, the listeners, if you don't know about Job, he is an interesting story where he had everything. He was blessed in material and family and so forth. And then it was stripped away. And so he was left with nothing. And he never cursed God, but yet he felt like God wasn't there with him in that sorrow. And at the end, we know the story, which is great, is that he was then blessed tenfold. And so we love that story, but it's like sitting in that grief with him and feeling that where's God in this? And I know there are people that feel that way. So speak to those listening about that.
Paige, my sense is that if we're human and we're honest, it's not just a matter of having seasons in which if if one can say this, sense God's absence. It's more a matter of what parts of me sense his absence all the time. The part of me that senses God's absence in a particular season, we would say probably is a part of me that has been around for a long time, and circumstances have simply pulled all the other characters to the side. And now this part has its place and role to play on the front of the stage. And life has a way of doing this. It has a way of sifting out and stripping away those parts of me that I have, that are part of my play that protect me and that protect me not just from the world, but protect me from parts of myself. I can find all kinds of ways to distract myself from the parts of me that still feel like a colicky, tantruming 7-month-old. The parts of us for whom our current grief is really not just causing my felt sense of God's absence, but has basically pulled the curtain back. I mean, at some point, we have to ask the question, what was happening with Adam and Eve? Given that God has a daily routine of coming around and having conversation with them at the end of the day, one has to wonder, what were they thinking about what's going to happen when he comes? What happens in the conversation with the snake such that their attention is so drawn to something other than their awareness that we have a life with God that rhythmically takes place in a certain way, and that doesn't happen? Something happens in that conversation long before any fruit gets eaten. We would say this is what we mean when we say we are people of the second wound. Right? The first wound of the Bible takes place one page earlier, right? When God causes Adam to fall into a deep sleep and opens up his chest wall, and out he brings Eve, this other part of humanity, to Adam. And like, but Adam's response to that wound was what? Poetry and song. Because the intention of the wound is to move one toward integration, move one toward wholeness, move one toward maturity, move one toward becoming more and more of who you are really intended to be. The second wound, when the snake enters the garden, the second wound is all a wound of intending to decreation, a wound of destruction, a wound of devouring, a wound of disintegration. It's the intention of the wounding. And that wounding begins in the conversation because there are elements about the nature of how the snake talks to her. One might think, excuse me, I don't know what you're talking about God not telling me the truth. I think I would love for us, though, to wait until God comes this afternoon, and then the four of us can have the conversation. There's something about the nature of how the conversation is emerging, and even as it does, that something in that is wounding enough that it's already drawing their attention away from their awareness of what their life of beauty and goodness already is. And so we want to acknowledge that as people of the second wound, it's hard for me to get my mind around all the parts of me that might feel as if God isn't present. I grew up in Ohio for my parents. I would say there's nothing good about my life that does not have to do with my parents. Everything good about my life, I can say my parents have their fingerprints on this. And my parents were also imperfect. Jesus followers, I have no question about their affection for me, their love for me. I was not a kid who was mistreated or abused in any really significant ways, but they were imperfect. And I would have longed to have had a father who would have been able, for example, to have had substantive conversations with me about really important things. That never happened. And the absence of his presence, that neglect, not because he's waking up in the morning and saying to himself, how can I neglect my son this morning? Right? He's doing the best he can. And I get that. But that doesn't change the fact that there were things that I needed that I didn't get that were kind of like not getting vitamin C, like that kind of thing. It's not like, oh, I didn't get a mini bike. It's like there were other crucially important relational things that I didn't get, in particular from my father, that even now are coming home to roost after all these years. And so, what does that mean? There's a certain loss, there's a certain grief that I have from losing something that I intuitively sense I should have and could have gotten, but I didn't get. And what do you know? It shows up in all kinds of moments where I get irritated, where I get colicky, where I get snippy, where I get impatient, where my rage wants to come into the room. It happens when I become critical of others, all the things. And so what does this mean? This means that there is this felt sense literally in my body of God's absence. Now, I met Jesus for the first powerful time when I was about 13, and I don't have any question about Jesus' presence with me. But his presence with me still means that he's working to bring all the parts of me into maturity, including the parts of me that still don't believe that he loves me. And so we would see the story of Job as one that is not just a matter of he has this experience of God's absence just because of what has happened to him. But what has happened to him has pulled the curtain back on the parts of Job that perhaps already had trouble believing in God's presence. But he also, I mean, to the devil's point, right? To the accuser's point, he had plenty of stuff around him to protect him from those parts. That doesn't mean that that was the only purpose that they were serving. They were good, genuine gifts for which he was grateful. And as it turns out, they also served an additional purpose. And when they do go away, this now becomes an opportunity not just for God to teach Job about God, but for God to say to Job, the part of you that has for such a long time been in grief, hidden away, but believes that I'm not here for you, I want that part to know without a doubt that you've never been away from me. And that's part of what's happening here. In your loss, which is not of my doing, but in your loss, I'm going to come for the parts of you that have grieved for longer than you're even aware that you've been grieving. And this is hard for us to understand, but I think this is where our grief that often we've housed for years and is so entrenched that I don't even know that that's what it is. That when that has the opportunity to be present to others over a long period of time, I come to allow that part to weep, to rage, to weep more, to continue to tell the story, and to look up and to find that this body of believers, they are not leaving the room. And they are here to say, this is really hard. And we're not leaving the room. And that becomes that space where the parts of me that over and over and over, and we say, look, our grief, if you're a human, you're going to have grief until you no longer have a pulse. Because in this world, we live in a world of tribulation. But what we also know is that Jesus is, as Lewis likes to say, good infection. Jesus is infecting us with his good cheer because our intention is our attention is being drawn to the voices, the facial expressions, the body language of those who are with me in the room, bringing time honored comfort and courage and recommissioning that is also going to help me retell my story. Because my grief is not just an emotional state, it also is a story that I tell. When I lose my best fountain pen, it's not just the loss of an object, that promotes within me a story that I tell. I'll never find that pen again. I'll never write in the same way that I will again. I'll never have the same kind of joy of watching that blue ink flow on the page. There's a certain sense in which the object is lost, but now I am going to tell a story about this. And this story that I tell in my grief is linked to the third page of the Bible. Right? This is the story of the serpent saying to the woman, he doesn't love you. You're not nearly as important as you thought you were. You think you're made in his image? What God who would make you in his image would keep this from you? This isn't a story just about God. This is, I mean, as we like to say, evil is the second smartest force on the planet. I can't compete with it. But notice, evil is very, very wily in its intention to fool the first couple. He tells her things about God. He doesn't want you. He tells her things about God and allows her to draw conclusions about herself without being explicit about it. This is part of evil's brilliance. We tell stories about ourselves based on evidence that we get in the world that other people are telling about other people. I make stuff up. And if I don't check this out, if I don't say, excuse me, I want to wait till God comes around this afternoon and then can we double check this? And this is what the body of believers are for. It's for me to make sure that I'm not telling a story in the privacy of my own mind that is actually untrue to the biblical narrative. But this is how evil will want to corner me, paint me into that corner, and then have me believing a story that I'm telling because I'm telling it by myself. And once my grief gets locked into the privacy of my own mind, there is no end to how far down the rabbit hole I will go, telling myself that I am alone, that God doesn't love me, and my life doesn't matter, so forth and so on, because I have lost my favorite fountain pen, because I have lost this relationship, because this thing has happened to me, and so forth. This doesn't mean that we quickly or simply just move through our grief and pretend that nothing has happened. This is the other mistake that we make. We lose things and then pretend that we somehow shouldn't be upset, shouldn't be mad, shouldn't be sad, shouldn't all these things. I mean, there's a reason that Job isn't 4 chapters long, right? There's lots of grappling. And you look at the Psalms, the Psalter, right? You figure there's 150 Psalms. Like, why do they have to write so many? Why can't you just have like five? Okay, maybe 10. But there is this sense in which the Hebrews knew that grief is so wide and so deep that we need to have a literature that is robust enough to tolerate who we are. And they also believed in a God who could take it. And in that way, God is saying, you bring me your grief, and we're going to work on this for as long as it takes for me to turn you into the person that you and I both know on your best days you want to be.
Do you know what it reminds me, going back to after Adam and Eve made the choice to sin and God comes up to them and says, "Who told you that?" That is such a
Right.
core
Right.
question,
Right.
right? To ask
Right.
ourselves.
Right. Exactly. Absolutely.
Transformative.
Right. We often say, human beings, unlike any other creature, we are storytellers. Everything that we do, I'm going to go to the grocery store. I'm thinking it, but I'm telling a story. Like I know, but Kurt, like, you're just going to the grocery store. Are you really telling a story? Yes, this is what I'm planning. These things in my head. We're doing these things. We're telling stories about Notre Dame and potentially Ohio State, right? We're telling us these stories that we're telling. But one of the things that's important for us to recognize is that I never tell my story as a single author. I might think I'm the only one that's generating these comments in my head, but I always have collaborative authors with me. I have co authors all the time. And so the question is not, am I telling the story or are you telling the story? The question is, who is helping me tell my story? Who are the names? Who are the people that are in my head? Some of these people aren't even alive anymore, but they are in my mind. So, to your point, God asks, who's telling your story with you? Who's telling you this? And we have to be very clear about and aware that my storytelling mechanism that is on all the time, even when we're dreaming, my storytelling mechanism, who are the people? And so for our listeners, we might ask this question. Who are the 2 to 5 people in our lives that you could say, oh, these are the primary co-authors with me on the story that is my life? It's Jim and it's Sarah and it's Ken or whoever it is. And the thing is, sometimes those authors are people that we're not paying that much attention to, but have woven things in to our story in ways that are not good. Like, so, at some point, my dad and I are going to have a conversation about this, but he co authored things with me by being silent. And that was problematic for me, continues to be problematic for me. And what do? Oh, I'm making stuff up. The story that I'm making up is like, I'm by myself. I have to find comfort on my own. Nobody's coming for me. And you might say, well, your dad didn't tell you that. No, he told me that by not telling me anything else. Because this is what we will do, because we are storytellers, we are looking for our co authors. And when there is silence or when there is active trauma, we like to say, first, we are creatures who first sense, and then we are making sense of what we sense. And we're doing this all the time. And this is what we're doing with our grief. We sense our grief, and then we are telling a story about it. And who are our co-authors that are enabling us to tell the story as truly and as faithfully to the way the world really is, capital I, from God's perspective, as we can possibly tell it?
Oh, man, that it's just so impactful of just thinking of what narratives are we listening to and who is the contributing factor. And it's not just who's in our life presently, as you indicated, it's things that were spoken over us when we were younger, right?
Yeah,
That we've now
yeah,
integrated
right.
into everything that we are, our identity. So that's us as
Right.
individuals processing this grief. But I would love to transition and talk about the community because I know community is huge. And
Mm.
for those that maybe aren't in a season of sorrow themselves, not knowing how to walk alongside people. Like, it go back to the Job story, right? When his friends show
Hmm.
up, the
Hmm.
best thing they ever did was just sit with him. But then they open their
Hmm.
mouths. It's like, how often do we do that as humans, right? As if what I have to say is gonna
I think,
fix it all.
right. Yeah. It's like they did everything they could. They just couldn't
Yep,
help
yep.
themselves.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
speak to that a little bit about how we
Yeah.
could be the right community for the people we love in the season of sorrow.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing that I tell folks, we like to talk about um, the physics of what I call relational mass effect. If you sit in a room and tell your story to one person, parts of your story that no one ever knows, a person who's receptive to this, you will have a particular experience of empathy, particular experience of renewal, a particular experience of awakening. If you sit in a room with three people and tell them the story, you have a different experience that is deeper and even more durable. If you sit in a room with 6 to 7 or 8 other people, now your mind takes in the awareness that my story is not just being held by one person, it's being held by 7 or 8 people. Now, this process takes longer because my brain is having to take in the attunement from all these different people, but my brain is also now worrying because I'm having to keep track of all the and how are they responding and so forth and so on. But over time, as I continue to tell this story, I take with me the presence not just of one person, but the presence of multiple people. And the analogy that I use is this: if you were to be standing on your sidewalk and you were to look up and see that you're being approached by an empty red wagon, a radio flyer wagon that your children pull, right? It would be strange to look up and see this, but if you were to look up and see that wagon approaching you at walking pace, that's 3 miles an hour. If you needed to stop it, you would simply put your foot out and stop it. If you were standing on a railroad track and were to look up to see a locomotive approaching you at 3 miles an hour, there's nothing you could do to stop it. But it would have nothing to do with its velocity. It would have to do with its mass effect. We imagine ourselves as siloed, isolated individuals, and our grief, that is largely a function of our fear and our shame, is the locomotive. And we can't stop it, which is why we need to build a bigger train. And the community is the relational mass effect of a train that becomes bigger than the shame that we each individually carry. And over time, the impact of a community, the impact of the body of Jesus, has the effect not just of having the comfort of multiple voices, but it literally has a neural impact on our felt sense of presence and comfort because I'm getting it from multiple different sources. When the Apostle Paul wrote his letter to the church at Corinth and also his letter to the church at Rome, and he uses the metaphor of the body in 1 Corinthians 12, Romans 12, the presence of the body of Christ. We are one body with many parts. What's striking about that is that the body in ancient Roman and Greek culture was virtually completely utilitarian. It was not honored other than what we do by artistically sculpting it. But even then, we want to sculpt it so that we can use it. If I'm a Roman citizen and I wanted to have sex with whomever, whenever, however I wanted to, if that person was not a Roman citizen, I could do that because their body was utilitarian to me. If you had a child that you didn't want, you would just throw the child in the ditch because the child is merely a body to be disposed of. If we needed to conquer our neighbors, we would put thousands of crosses up and crucify them because the body is utilitarian. Paul awakens our imagination to the second page of the Bible. And the Lord God formed the man out of the mud of the earth. The first thing that he does is build a body. And that for the man to become fully human, he has to have God's breath, but he has to have a body. He brings the woman to the man in a new body, connected to each other. We are these embodied creatures. And so it is that when Paul uses the body as the metaphor that he does, he is making a statement that is blasphemous to the Roman and Greek cultures. It is a scandal because he is reawakening the imagination to what the Hebrew biblical notion of the body is about. He is saying the very thing that you all thought was worthy of crucifixion, the Spirit is elevating and saying, this is what we are going to call ourselves. We're not going to call ourselves a building. We're not going to make ourselves a metaphor of a cart. We're not going to make we're not the metaphor of a wolf. We are of a human body. This is who we are. And so it is that our body, both individually and corporately, becomes the very place where God chooses to come and dwell, to regenerate us in the middle of our grief, such that we then are renewed into icons of beauty and goodness while we are being called to create beauty and goodness and allow our suffering and our grief to be the very route that God takes on the way to performing that act.
I just blown away, and a lot of people don't know the cultural context of which the
Mm,
Bible was written, and so
mm,
things like that is when you have a firm understanding of the audience that Paul was talking to, how counter-cultural Jesus was, how counter-cultural Paul was, and we have to have that filter when we read the Word because it does transform the message so that we can
mm.
hear through the Holy Spirit and understand how big of a deal all of this was. That's so powerful. Well, we're getting to the end of the show of our time here in our conversation, but I would love for people
Yeah,
to get your
yeah, yeah.
information, find your books, your podcast. Where can they find that information?
Sure. Thanks. That's very kind to ask. First of all, most people are finding out about me, I think, most commonly now through the Being Known podcast with my co-host Pepper Sweeney and our producer Amy Chella. You can find that on any of the platforms that you use to find your podcasts. You can also find me at my own personal website, Curt Thompson, CurtThompsonMD.com, where we have a number of different resources for folks to partake of there. I also am found on Instagram and on Facebook. You can follow me there, as well as we are doing work in a nonprofit called the Center for Being Known that offers people confessional communities that are lay-led. And then we also are doing work in our practice, New Story Behavioral Health. It's here in Northern Virginia, where we're doing training work for people, clinicians, and help people in helping professions who really want to learn how to lead these groups in their particular contexts. So a number of different ways for people to have access to that work.
So fascinating. I know in my background is not only therapy, but I'm a pastor presently, and we are really moving into the community piece, the small
Yeah,
groups, and how there's so much healing in that. So definitely will
yeah,
check out your resources.
yeah.
Thank you for that.
Very good. You're welcome.
Again, thank you so much for joining me, Dr. Thompson. I really appreciate all the
You're welcome.
wisdom today, and I'm sure my listeners did as well.
Yeah,
So thank
indeed.
you.
Yeah, Paige, my pleasure. Great to be with you.
Joining me now is my producer, Mike Sergovia, and my other producer, Ariel Daves. And so we're going to talk through like how powerful was that for you guys listening to the conversation? Because I know I was like tearful at some points. I was deep into a therapeutic session and I was like, yes, tell me more, Dr. Thompson. How did you guys feel about it?
Paige, it was so amazing to me that while I'm listening to it, how authentic he was. I kept saying, he this is really touching him deeply. This is so true to him. I mean, this is who he is. And I was thinking, gosh, it's Dr. Curt Thompson. He does a lot of these interviews, but yet it, Paige, you know what it felt like to me? Like this was the first time he was sharing this with somebody. So the authenticity of what he had to say throughout the conversation, that just blew me away. It was amazing. What did you think, Ariel?
Yeah, I think what was so meaningful to me was that he went to the root of the issue. And I feel like there are so many books on grief out there and a lot of counseling where they go for the branches. They swing for the branches and identify the sadness and go through those motions, but he went to the root of the issue and he went back to the beginning and like, let's go to page 3 of the Bible and let's go talk about like where this came from and deal with the root. And I love that he talked about the sadness of Jerusalem. Jesus is weeping over the sadness of Jerusalem. And that kind of just went back to the beginning. Let's go for identity, the root issue. For me, that was what was so meaningful. And Mike, I agree with the whole this was very dear to his heart.
Mm,
You know,
mhm.
this is something that
Mhm.
came straight from his heart, and he very clearly loved and enjoyed talking about it. So,
Yeah, that's so good. And going with what you were saying, Ariel, as well, is like I really felt just this deep reckoning of the identity piece again as not only just being known in our grief but the fact that Satan has entered not just Adam and Eve's lives, but our lives as well. And it's that idea of what is spoken over us that now we have taken that narrative
mhm.
and we've turned it into the day-to-day process of how we live our lives. And that is so complicated because we can't always identify the authors he spoke to, who are the 2 to 5 authors, which I'm absolutely making a list, by the way. Is anybody else like I'm making a list? Who is the co-authors of Speaking Over Me? Because we all have them, right?
Mm,
Like I am certain that I have my father in my brain at some points, or even just like a friend that I had in high school who spoke death over me instead of life. Like I know I still incorporate those things, but how that contributes to our grief, as well as the distortion that Jesus is not there. That's that big piece there
Yeah.
is that people like Job are, it is such a great illustration, right? Of the whole like where is God in this? He's not meeting me where I want him to meet me. But in reality, he is meeting me. He's just not in the way that we think maybe we want him to be. So that was really a powerful takeaway
mm.
as well for me. Another thing, and maybe you guys can let me know what you think about this, is like the whole idea of what the healing you think it should look like, right? That whole idea of what does my healing look like? And I can relate to that. I want healing to be fullness and peace and back to a joyful disposition. that's not always the case. So for instance, like, have you ever had a season where it was just rough and you have a lot of hope for what it can look like, where it's so much so that when you get a little bit of that relief, you're like, hey, that's not the type of relief I want. And it's almost like this resentment or frustration that God's not providing. Have you guys had a season like that at all?
Yeah, I've had that happen in my life, especially like growing up. And, um, my dad wasn't really present. So I had some of those moments, even thinking, okay, things are going to get better, and then they don't. And then I kind of wait. And so, yes, I've definitely have had that in my life. Yes.
Yeah. And so as you like move through that, again, you get that choice. Do I surrender this to the Lord and trust that He wants my good, that this is how He is showing me the good? Or do I get resentful and turn on God and say, you obviously don't care. You're not there for me, which again is listening to those co authors, which the evil one does that. We have evil ones that speak that negativity and that death over us. And so we have that choice. And I think that also reminds us that we are still empowered. We're still empowered to make good choices and to live the life that God has destined for us. Another one of my takeaways was the idea of just sitting in your grief and allowing yourself to weep. And I know that Dr. Thompson talked about this as well, as like, if you just need to weep, if you need to rage, if you need to weep again. I know that in my counseling sessions, I do a lot of that with people, just normalizing the grief process and the fact that you can take one step forward and like 1,000 steps back and you feel like you're not moving and healing. But the reality is you are still processing and you are still grieving because there was a wound that takes time to heal. And I appreciated that he talked about not just death, but we're talking about loss of any kind that was significant to you. So I know that when I do marriage counselings, for instance, and if there's infidelity, I talk about the infidelity as if it's a death of the relationship, because it is. They've left the marriage, the covenant. And that process takes a lot of work and healing, of weeping and raging and weeping again. And so just normalizing that for the people out there, that if you're in that season, making sure that you allow yourself to experience those feelings as well. Well, friends, thanks so much again for joining us today for this conversation with Dr. Curt Thompson. Of course, you can find all his information in the show notes, as well as some of our takeaways and ways you can get connected to me, because I would love to hear from you. If you would like to email me, you can do that at paigeklingenpeel@gmail.com. We have a lot of exciting interviews coming up, so be sure to tune in again next time for another edition of Embracing Your Season.